Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is redo and change in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Suspicions. AKA Hebai, Red Snake. Ichigo stood in the center of the battle and saw Grimmjow rushing over towards him. The panther was looking forward to not only killing a Soul Reaper, but also having a fight with a worthy foe. Ichigo didn't budge when he saw Grimmjow rushing towards him. Grimmjow went for a slash at the captain, but Ichigo flashed out of the way. Grimmjow looked around for the Soul Reaper and saw him standing behind the snake he was fighting earlier. So, you just gonna run and hid behind someone else? You coward! He yelled out as he rushed him again. Doesn't matter to me. Two birds, one strike. He went for another slash but was stopped when the captain grabbed his paw with a bare hand. Grimmjow was shocked by what just happened, same with the snake boy. Well? Ichigo started with a grin. That all you got, kitty cat? Ichigo flung Grimmjow away from him and the snake boy and watched him skid for a few seconds. Grimmjow caught himself to a stop and stared at the captain with rage burning in his eyes. You're so dead, Soul Reaper! He yelled out as he sonitoed towards them. Grimmjow appeared behind Ichigo and went for his neck, but when he did, he saw the captain slightly turn his head and glare at him. Grimmjow didn't know what came over him, but that glare was something strange to him. He would be the first to tell anyone that he wasn't a person who could feel fear towards anyone, but at that moment, Grimmjow knew fear just by that glare. Regaining himself, Grimmjow sonitoed away from them at the last second and looked over to the captain. I'm only gonna say this once, Grimmjow. Ichigo started, surprising the panther hollow in front of him. Ichigo touched the snake boy on his shoulder, sending a cold shiver through him. The boy nervously looked up to the captain and shuddered when he could practically see the venom coming from his eyes. Next time you attack this kid, I'll make you beg me to kill you. Grimmjow could see that venom coming from his eyes as well and slowly backed away. He had never felt fear like this before. With one last glance, Grimmjow turned and ran away from the Soul Reaper captain. The boy didn't know what to think as the captain looked back down to him. He tensed at the sudden look but noticed that it wasn't like before. There was none of that venom or deathly power behind his gaze. It was just a normal expression. I'm slightly impressed, kid. Ichigo started as he looked at the boy. Only a few hours and you already took on someone like Grimmjow and didn't die. He started in with an unsure tone. Why did you save me earlier? Ichigo let go of the boy's shoulder and walked off. The boy followed and walked next to him. He looked up to Ichigo as he walked over to a familiar area to the boy. With a gasp the boy slithered in front of Ichigo to stop him. You can't go that way, Soul Reaper. He yelled out in an almost pleading tone. That stopped Ichigo, but he kept his gaze fixed on where a certain spirit energy was. You may have been able to scare off Grimmjow, but the guy over there isn't afraid of anyone. He'll make you rot before you could even draw your sword. The boy said to no avail as the captain still had his gaze fixed on Las Noches. The boy decided to make the captain notice his warning the only way he could think of without attempting to fight him. Soul Reaper. Ow. Damn it, kid. Ichigo started as he rubbed his ear. I'm not deaf. I heard you the first time. Ichigo could see the confusion in his eyes and sighed. First off, my name is Ichigo Kenpeikako. It isn't Soul Reaper, so etch that name into your head, got it? He saw the boy nod to him and continued. Secondly, since you don't have a name, I'll call you AKA Hebai. That's your name from now on, so get used to it. AKA thought about it for a second before he looked at his hair and tail scythe. They were both red and he was a snake, so the name does make perfect sense. AKA looked back up to Ichigo to see him smirking at him. And lastly, I'm not looking for that one. This confused AKA for a while before he felt several Vastolord-type energies approaching them. He looked out and saw them standing not too far away from them. They all looked over to Ichigo and AKA could tell that they were all very curious about how strong he was. Ichigo crossed his arms and looked at the group of Vastos standing there. Before we get started, he said to them with a grin on his face. Does anyone wish to leave? His answer was met with a light blue lance being thrown at him. He caught it with his left hand and held it in place. This surprised everyone there as Ichigo clenched his hand and the lance shattered. Ichigo looked over to the Vasto who threw it and recognized him immediately as Ulquiorra. Ichigo looked over the rest and recognized most of them as the Espada that he's met before along with a few he had never seen before. He recognized Ulquiorra, Yami who was hard not to miss, a blonde woman with a shark mask on, Nell who was in her horse-like form, the only one who looked more human than anyone, and tall man with multiple arms. He didn't recognize the pink-haired Hollow, a man with a pink pumpkin for legs, or the massive grotesque purple ooze standing not too far away. Ichigo counted them all and made sure they saw him do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. He finished as he placed his hand on his chin. Who are you, Soul Reaper? Ulquiorra asked him. Ichigo looked over to him and smirked. Captain Ichigo Kenpei Kako of Squad 11. I suggest you all get used to hearing that name. Ichigo turned around and walked off followed by a confused AKA. Before Ichigo could even take 5 steps, he was met with multiple different Zeros fired at his back. Every one of the beams collided with him and kicked up sand and dust all around in a massive explosion. All 9 Vastos looked unimpressed at how easy it was to dispatch one overly arrogant Soul Reaper, but those unimpressed looks faded when the dust cleared to show the captain standing there completely unscathed. He had his Zanpakuto in front of him and held it downward. AKA was behind him the entire time and looked behind him to see a massive arch of scorched sand. Ichigo looked at the 9 and grinned at them before lowering his sword. Well, at least I know how strong a Zero fired by multiple different Vasto-class hollows feels like now. He placed his blade on his shoulder and his free hand in his pocket. What else any of you got? The 9 tensed up for a moment before Yami decided to trot over. You think that just because you got power that it makes you better than me? He yelled out as he trotted over. The other 8 noticed that Ichigo had a killer look to his face and tried to stop the big guy, but to no avail. Yami ran up to the motionless Ichigo and threw a punch to him. As the massive fist made its way over to him, AKA was terrified at what was happening. AKA. Ichigo started, getting the boys' attention. Go stand next to them. You do not want to get in my way when I demonstrate my own power. AKA didn't waste any time and so kneeled next to the blonde-haired woman. They were surprised by how fast the boy was, but kept their focus on Yami and the Soul Reaper captain. Yami's fist approached Ichigo and before it made contact, Ichigo grinned devilishly. He raised his left hand and stopped the fist without even budging from his original spot. Yami froze when that happened, same as everyone else. They had never seen anyone, Hollow or Soul Reaper, stop Yami's attack with nothing but pure strength before. My turn. Ichigo started as he brought his blade off of his shoulder. He flicked his wrist and left a massive gash on Yami's arm. Yami gripped his arm and yelped in pain. He had never felt anything like this before. He looked down to Ichigo and saw the grin on his face. That look wasn't the look of someone that you fight, but someone that you run away from. Yami was about to do just that, but was too slow. Ichigo held his sword out in front of him and whispered. Carve their hearts out, Zanjutsu. His blade disappeared and was replaced with the 2 black blades. The pressure and killing intent coming from those blades and Ichigo was enough to have Yami prepared to run for the hills, but he never got the chance as Ichigo flashed from in front of the others. They were all caught off guard at how fast he was and simply looked at him then to Yami. Said Hollow was completely motionless for several seconds until Ichigo brought his blades together to form his sealed blade. Suddenly, Yami started to fall apart in massive chunks of his body. The other Hollows watched as his body parts fell onto the ground piece by piece and knew that if one of the most dangerous Hollows in recent memory was brought down by one person so easily, then that meant they wouldn't fare too well themselves. That was amazing. The pink-haired one said in awe. Thanks. Ichigo started as he slashed at the air to get rid of the blood. He sheathed his blade and crossed his arms to them. So then tell me, what are your names? Everyone tensed as he watched them with his brown eyes carefully, almost like he was analyzing them one by one. There was an unnatural silence in the air for a short while before the blonde decided to speak up first. Tia Halibel. She stepped forward and bowed in respect to Ichigo. He in return nodded to her and looked at the man with the pumpkin body. Zizamari Ruruio. He bowed as well, earning him a nod. Ulquiorra Sifur. Nilil Tuadalshwank. Neutra Gilga. Sail Aporo. Araniro Arururi. Coyote Stark. This is Liline at Gingerbuck. With the last one introducing himself, Ichigo nodded to the group. He started to remember who most of them were at this point because of the bit of information the Hogyaku had on them. They were, for the most part, loyal to Aizen in his future, but mainly served him out of either respect, manipulation, or fear. Ichigo knew that he had to break away from Aizen's way of controlling an individual and instead work on gaining their trust. It would be difficult considering he could clearly see fear in their eyes, but it was worth a shot. Ichigo looked at each of them and then to Aka. He sighed when he turned and saw the pieces of yami scattered about. Ninha. He said to himself. Ichigo shrugged before turning back to them. I'll find a 10th one later. This caught their attention and Tia was the first to speak up. What exactly so you mean by that? Ichigo smirked at her question and chuckled under his breath. He stopped to answer her. I'm gonna need 10 of the strongest hollows to join me in destroying the Soul Society. And by my count I only have 9. He already knew that Baragon would be a problem all things considered. The Hogyaku had told him that Baragon always planned on destroying Aizen at the most opportune time, but he never had the chance. Why would you want to destroy the Soul Society? You're a Soul Reaper. Neelil asked him. I have my reasons. That's all any of you need to know. Ichigo answered her. So you basically need to reform the Espadas? Stark asked him in an unsure tone. Yeah, pretty much. Ichigo answered him in his usual tone. Any of you know another powerful hollow that could fit in the ranks of the Espada? Well, there is Baragon, but he would never join a Soul Reaper for any reason. Sail started. There's also Grimjo, though he would most likely just fight you rather than join you. The Hogyaku was definitely right about Sail. An analyst through and through. He and Sosuke would be very useful to deal with Kisuke if it comes down to that. Then I'll deal with Baragon later. Ichigo said as he turned and walked away from the group. He stopped and opened a Gargantat, surprising everyone that he, a Soul Reaper, was able to do that. He turned back to them. I'll be back in a few days. I certainly hope none of you decide to try anything the next time I show up, otherwise you'll wind up like him. He motioned to Yami and left them all to ponder just what to do next. Ichigo came out of the Gargantat and was now in his room back in Squad 11. He lowered the barrier and left the room. When he did, he felt the spiritual pressure of his Hine Shiba knocking on his door. Ichigo had to think fast. He knew that if his Hine saw even a small amount of doubt in Ichigo's story, then everything would be undone. So, much to his embarrassment that his own father would see, Ichigo decided that the only way to get away with his trip was to sell his story. Bring up terrible memories and force tears, or at least make it look as if he was crying. When he did that, he went to his door and opened it. Captain Shiba. Ichigo started as he rubbed one of his eyes. There's something I can help you with. Ishine was very surprised to see that Ichigo had probably been remembering those times that he mentioned earlier. Are you okay, Ichigo? He sighed and looked around. When he saw none of his squad mates weren't around, he motioned for Ishine to follow him in. Ichigo closed his door and turned to Ishine. I never told anyone that story before. Ichigo said to him as he sat on his bed. Ishine sat in a nearby chair and watched Ichigo with a concerned look on his face. I thought that I'd made peace with what happened, but destroying that hollow and then telling it all of a sudden with some people that I don't even know. I'm sorry for bringing it up. Ishine said to him. In all honesty, I never thought you would show emotions other than rage and irritation. Ishine gave a weak smile at Ichigo. Yeah. Ichigo started as he rubbed his other eye and took a breath. He stood up along with Ishine and they walked to the door. Before they went through it, Ichigo stopped and took a deep breath and regained his composure. He looked over at Ishine and smirked. Thanks, Ishine. I think I really needed that. Ishine put a hand on his shoulder and smiled. Come on. Let's go get some drinks and talk about other things. Ichigo smirked at him and nodded. Out of everyone back here in the past, his father was definitely someone that he didn't want to see hurt when his plans came to fruition. Chapter 7, More Soldiers. Ichigo was walking along the streets to get to the usual training spot. He along with Sosuke and Jin would go there and train whenever they had the time, what with the way their schedules were. The usual place was in a forest near a waterfall that had a large spring to it. Ichigo would use a Kido spell on the spring to heal anyone if they were injured. It helped boost Sosuke and Jin's morale along with making the already warm waters even more enjoyable. As he walked he felt a familiar energy not so far away and in a tree. Ichigo stopped and sighed loudly. "Swafon." He started in his usual tone. "Stalking me better not be the reason you're not training now, is it?" Swafon flashed in front of him and bowed in respect. "Forgive me, Captain, but I need to ask you a favor." Ichigo arched an eyebrow but listened to her nonetheless. "I've noticed that Lieutenant Aizen and 3rd Seat Ichimaru have grown in strength since you became a captain. Once when I was spying on you before you caught me, I noticed that you were leading them somewhere outside of the Siridi. After much thought, I think I know why they're so strong now, and so I ask of you, Captain Ko." She raised her head to him and he could see the fire and determination in her eyes. "Will you please train me as well, sir?" Ichigo looked at her quizzically and started to rub his chin with his right hand. He had no intention of letting Swafon join him at all, since in his time she had openly stated that she would want nothing more than to kill him herself. She was a hard case that only lived to serve as Yoriuki's own little whipping girl in Ichigo's eyes, but something about her now was different. At first, Ichigo only told her to become stronger in order for him to gain her trust so he could take advantage of the confusion like Aizen had before. This was strange to him now because she wasn't all over Yoriuki anymore. Swafon had now looked up to him for pushing her to become stronger, something Yoriuki hadn't done whatsoever. Maybe this could work out in his favor. The more help he has, the easier, or at least less stressful, it will be to destroy the Siridi. After a little pause and seeing how she bowed her head back down, Ichigo sighed. He placed his hand on top of her head and ruffled up her hair, surprising the girl as she looked up to him. She saw that he had a small smirk on his face and that made her wonder just what he could possibly be thinking. "All right then." Ichigo started in a slightly more upbeat tone. "I'll train you, but know this, Swafon, I'm not training you to be a better assassin or to be faster." He raised her up with just his palm on top of her head so she could meet him eye to eye. At first she was surprised, but soon she found herself comfortable enough to listen to the rest of what he had to say. "I'm training you to become a better warrior. I saw potential in you the first time we met, so the last thing you want to do is disappoint me." He dropped her and she landed on her feet. "I understand, Captain," she said to him in her own slightly excited tone. "I won't disappoint you." "That's what I like to hear," Ichigo said with a grin. "Let's go. Sosuke and Jin are most likely already getting ready. Come on, Swafon." "Yes, sir," Swafon said as she followed the tall, orange-haired captain to her own path to becoming stronger than Yoriuki. Hueco Mundo, a few days later. After Ichigo left a few days ago, the 9 Espada had stayed together out of a mixture of curiosity and slight fear. The curiosity from just what the captain meant by destroying the Soul Society and dealing with Baragon. The fear was from if he really meant to go through with his threat of killing them like how he did with Yami. They were all sitting around along one of the ruins of the once great Lost Noches that Baragon hadn't taken over yet. AKA could tell that everyone was very skeptical about how this one powerful captain knows him so well. The animosity was getting a little too much for the boy, so he decided to take a walk, or rather a slither, around the ruins. As he was moving along the place, he stopped when he saw the sleeping panther on top of some of the rubble. AKA stood there frozen for several seconds before bothering to move away and back to the group. "What exactly do all of you think of this Ichigo guy anyway?" Stark asked the group as he lounged in the sand. "He's powerful. That's a fact," Sale answered. "I don't really see any weaknesses in him at all. That kind of power could change the very law of the land in this desert we call a home," Neutra said. "I wanna fight him at some point. He'd easily destroy you," Halibel said to him in a slightly annoyed tone. Neutra stood up from where he was and walked over to her. "What did you say, bitch?" Halibel wasted no time in standing up and getting her weapon ready for a battle. "I said that he would easily destroy you. Do you have a hard time understanding basic words, Neutra?" "Okay, that's enough. Ulquiorra stepped in the middle of the two. We are not going to fight each other this close to Baragon's fortress. It's not like we couldn't take him on. Neutra said to the bat-like Vastolord. As a matter of fact, I might as well take care of him myself. Neutra wailed away from the group and was about to leave to face Baragon, but he was stopped when he and everyone else heard a familiar voice coming from above. Well, at least now I know who's the hothead of this group. Everyone froze at the voice and looked up to see the captain from before sitting on some tall pillar. So you think you could take me on, Neutra? Ichigo flashed in front of the tall espada and pointed his blade to his neck. Neutra froze. Halibel is right, you know. I would easily destroy you. Ichigo grinned at Neutra's complicity when he finished his sentence. The espada was about to say something, but Ichigo cut his mask off before he could say a word. Neutra fell to the ground and started writhing in pain from whatever it was Ichigo had done to him. Everyone was disturbed that this captain had already taken out another one of them without any effort. There was a bright flash of yellow energy that blinded everyone before it dissipated. When everyone could see again, they all saw a very tall man standing up from the ground. He was skinny and had short black hair along with a hole where his left eye should be. He looked at himself and noticed that he was naked. What the hell did you do to me, Soul Reaper? Neutra yelled out only to notice that his voice was different and he had some kind of staff with a crescent blade at the end of it. There was a dead silence when he raised his staff and looked at it intently. There was a power behind the weapon that felt completely natural to him. It was hard to explain, but it felt like he was more powerful than he was only a few seconds ago. Now then. Ichigo started as he looked to the others with a smirk. Who's next? What did you do to him? AKA asked Ichigo in a slightly curious tone. I turned him into an Arrancar. Ichigo said bluntly, surprising everyone there. And I intend to do the same to each and every one of you. Now, like I said before, who's next? Ulquiorra stepped up and stood in front of the captain. Ichigo remembered this form very well. It was the form Ulquiorra used to put a hole through Ichigo's chest. Pushing those memories aside, Ichigo slashed at his mask like he did with Neutra, and Ulquiorra emitted the teal energy like his Zero. After a few seconds, Ulquiorra stood there in his Arrancar form, same as Neutra was. He had his Zanpakuto in his hand and was naked as well. He also had the number 5 in Gothic style on his chest. What's the number for? Ulquiorra asked in his new voice. It's your rank out of the 9 of you for now. Ichigo started. He turned to Neutra, who was looking for his number. Yours is 6, by the way. The number's on your tongue. Neutra checked, and sure enough there it was. A black, Gothic 6. Ichigo looked to the rest and was about to ask for the next one to show up when he felt a powerful pressure coming down on them. I don't know who you are, Soul Reaper, nor do I care. A powerful hollow-like voice said from above them. But whatever power you have will fit perfectly as a trophy to my power. Just as he finished saying those words, the entire group was surrounded by Baragon's army. The many Ajichas looked at the two human-looking hollows in confusion, and murmurs started to flow out from them. Throughout the commotion, Grimjo had sneaked his way over and was on top of a pillar. That Soul Reaper, again. He thought to himself. Ichigo placed his blade on his shoulder and looked up to Baragon with powerful eyes of his own. Baragon was taken aback by this for a short while before regaining his composure in front of his army. So you're this Baragon I've heard so much about, huh? Ichigo started. I thought you'd be an Arrancar or something more impressive than just another Vastolord, but this could be fun nonetheless. Don't underestimate my power, Soul Reaper. Baragon said in an irritated tone. I have been king of Hueco Mundo for centuries. The only reason that any of these other Vastolord even exist is because I allow it. You call yourself a king, yet you rule on a destroyed kingdom. Ichigo started, catching Baragon and everyone else off guard. If you really were a king, then you would have at least rebuilt this once great Hollow Knight Palace and would rebuild the hollows by now. All I see is a mass of hollows following you out of fear or blind loyalty into an endless loop of nothingness. What kind of a king does that? His words caused more murmurs throughout the army surrounding him. Baragon was seething at the captain's words and brought out his axe. Soul Reaper. I will rot your entire body from the inside out. He raised his weapon above his head and his army scattered away. Grimjo had also gotten out of the way, same with the espadas. Ichigo stood there alone in the area as everyone had their eyes on Baragon. His axe glowed with purple and black mist as the center point started to glow red. He swung downward and the mist flew over to Ichigo, engulfing him in its decaying energy. The nine along with Grimjo watched as the captain could no longer be seen and the surrounding area was rotting away. That, Baragon bellowed, is why I am the king of Hueco Mundo. None of you forget that. My rule is the law of the land. And what a flawed land it is. Ichigo yelled out from inside the smoke. Baragon looked down in shock as the mist started to swirl around in a dome of its energy. Everyone stood back some more as the mist started to seep around the area. Baragon couldn't believe what he was seeing, but that disbelief turned to shock when he could see the eyes of the captain through the mist. Those once brown eyes now were black with purple irises to them and filled with killing intent. The blade that the Soul Reaper had was raised into the air above the swirling dome of mist. The blade was perfectly fine and wasn't rotting at all. This surprised everyone there and they had no idea what was going to happen now. Carve their hearts out, Zanjitsu. The blade disappeared and the mist stopped swirling and started to fade away. When it did, Ichigo stood up with both his blades in his hands. The mist dissipated and Ichigo pointed his left blade to Baragon. I'm going to finish you, Baragon. He started with the same look on his face. And when I'm done with you, the Hollows here will learn that a leader who controls them through fear can always be beaten by someone who rules through respect. Baragon gritted his teeth and raised his axe in the air again, but before he could even fully raise it, his arm was now gone. His axe fell to the ground and everyone gasped at how the captain stood in front of Baragon with both blades impaling the now former king of Hueco Mundo. Who are you? Baragon asked as he felt the blades preparing to release some kind of energy. Ichigo looked at Baragon and then to everyone else that watched dumbstruck at what he had just done. My name is Captain Ichigo Kenpeikako. He yelled out so everyone could hear him. And this is the last time you'll see this hollow as your king. With those words, Ichigo looked back to Baragon and whispered, Getsuga Tenshou. A massive black and red energy came out of the blades and imploded inside of Baragon. He faded away with everything but his crown. Ichigo caught the crown with his blade and looked at it intently before letting it drop and shatter on the ground. Now that he's out of the way. Ichigo started as he looked around to see everyone's shocked and surprised expressions. Right now I have 9 espadas. I need one more to truly bring the full might of their power down on the Soul Society. When I return, this once great palace will be back to its former glory. And while I'm gone, Ichigo flashed over and slashed at the remaining 7's masks. They all glowed their respective colors, AKAs being red obviously, and were now Arrancar. AKA looked to be a 10-year-old boy with short red hair and a sword inside a red scabbard. He looked to himself and saw the black and gothic number on his right side. His number was 2. The rest of the numbers went as follows. Star K1. AKA 2. Neliel 3. Halabel 4. Ulquiorur 5. Neutra 6. Zomari 8. Sail 9. And Araniro 10. These 9 will be in charge of each and every single one of you until I come back in a few days. Ichigo said as he brought his blades together to form its single blade. He sheathed it and snapped his fingers to open a garganta. He stepped through it and was now back in his room. The barrier was around his room and Sosuke was sitting on the chair. He stood up in surprise when Ichigo stepped out of a garganta. Ichigo? He asked in surprise. Ichigo looked to him and smirked. He walked over and held out his hand to the lieutenant. Sosuke held out his hand and Ichigo placed a small ball of compressed purple and black mist into his hand. What is this? Sosuke asked him in confusion. Something to truly test your scientific mind, Sosuke. Ichigo started as he placed a hand on Sosuke's shoulder. I need you to make an Arrancar out of this energy, and make sure that the Arrancar is a child. Why a child, Ichigo? Children are easier to control when they're afraid, Sosuke. Ichigo said as he patted Sosuke's shoulder. Unless they're strong enough to listen to you with an open mind. Chapter 8, Sosuke's Creation. Misuto, Mist. After Ichigo had given Sosuke that ball of compressed energy, he has been working on it tirelessly whenever he had free time. And with having to juggle around his lieutenant duties to his squad, training, and making sure that his captain wasn't too suspicious of him and Jin, he did not have much free time. So after a few days and barely getting anything done, Sosuke could finally work on this energy without being interrupted. As Sosuke was in his secret lab that only he, Jin and Ichigo knew of, he prepared to put his brain to work. Ichigo was counting on him, and that was more than enough to motivate him to work harder than ever before. He placed mist into a container and placed it in the center of some type of device connected to the wall. The device had a mantle with tubes sticking all around it and connecting all along the walls and floor. Sosuke stood back from it and went over to a console not too far from it. "Okay," he said in a bit of frustration. This mist of energy had proven very stubborn for the past few hours and Sosuke was getting irritated. "Let's see if this works." He pressed several buttons on the console and the mantle started to glow a silver color. After a few seconds it changed different colors, red, purple, silver, black, red, and purple, until it finally stopped on purple with a black outline to it. Sosuke looked surprised for a moment. "It worked," he said to himself. The light started to fade and a figure of light was visible from inside the container. The figure was small enough that a child could fit into it, and was starting to lose the light that had covered it like a veil. When the veil of light was finally gone, Sosuke could see that the figure was in fact a child. Amazed by what he had done, he quickly sent a hell butterfly off to retrieve Ichigo so he could see just what he had done. Squad 11 Barracks. To say that it was a loud day in the squad barracks was an understatement. The entire squad had gathered around the main courtyard to see both their captain and Zaraki fist fight each other for fun. The fight had gone on for more than half an hour and both men were covered in bruises and blood. They had on just their hakamas and Ichigo threw his Haori away when the fight started. The crowd had been slightly split down the middle with one side cheering on their captain and the other cheering on Zaraki. Both men had manic grins on their faces and had been enjoying themselves to no end. "Now this is what I call a fun time," Ichigo said to his lieutenant. Ever since Ichigo took control as captain, he made Zaraki his lieutenant, stating that he was strong and powerful enough to keep watch of the squad if anything were to happen to himself. "Damn straight, Captain!" Zaraki yelled back. It was strange for Ichigo to get any sign of respect from Kenpei, but since he has proven that he is more than an equal in this time, Zaraki was more than willing to follow him anywhere that had strong enemies. That might be very useful later on. The two ran at each other to continue their battle before a hell butterfly flew into view of the both of them. The two stopped and Ichigo sighed before letting out his finger for the butterfly to sit on. He put his ear to it and there was a deafening silence in the crowd. Anticipations and hoping that it wasn't the head captain calling him up was high so everyone could continue watching these two fight. When the captain sighed though, everyone grunted in annoyance. Ichigo waved the butterfly off and noticed the commotion getting louder. With a single flare-up of energy to get everyone's attention, Ichigo said to them, "All right, fight's over. Get back to what you were doing before. While I'm gone, Zaraki is in charge, understood?" He yelled out to them. "Yes, Captain," everyone said before scattering off. Ichigo walked over to where he threw his Haori. "Old man, calling you up again?" Zaraki asked him as he walked with his captain. "Yep," Ichigo said in an annoyed tone as he placed his Haori on. "I'll be back when I can, so take care of things here, Zaraki." "Gotcha." Zaraki gave a thumbs up before heading over to his adoptive daughter. Ichigo used a healing Kido on himself and flashed away from his squad barracks. To everyone else, it seemed like he was heading to Squad 1, but in actuality he was going over to the secret labs underneath Squad 5. Ichigo made his way in through a fake wall and went down a flight of stairs. After a few twists and turns he found himself in one of the main labs where Sosuke worked. "This had better be good, Sosuke," Ichigo said to him. "I was in the middle of a match before you sent an urgent message." Sosuke smiled at the captain. "Trust me, this is well worth it. Follow me." Ichigo did just that and they were now in the room with the mantle on the wall. Once Ichigo got a look at what was in the container, he stared at it with wide eyes. The once king of Hueco Mundo, Baragon, was nothing more than a small child now. The child had light brown skin and long purple hair with glowing black highlights around the tips. The child opened its eyes and Ichigo could see the deep purple on its face. "Open it up, Sosuke," Ichigo told him. Sosuke did just that and opened the container from the console. When the container opened, the child fell to the ground and its hair covered it for the most part. Ichigo knelt down to it and reached his hand out. He grabbed the child gently by the chin and lifted its head. When he did that, he saw that the kid was actually a girl and had no hollow hole. At first Ichigo was surprised and turned to Sosuke with an eyebrow raised. "Despite the energy you gave me, I found out that I couldn't recreate a body that could hold Baragon's power without tearing it apart on contact." He went over to the two with a blanket and knelt to the girl. She was clearly scared and shivering badly. Sosuke placed the blanket around her and continued. "After trying for hours with the same result, I decided to try a different approach." Ichigo watched as Sosuke went back over to the console and started to type on it. After a few seconds he motioned Ichigo to come over to him. Ichigo obliged and went over only to realize that the girl had been holding his hand the entire time as he walked over. He didn't mind it though. "The alternate approach I used was a combination of her power and some of the excess that you emit." Sosuke started, catching Ichigo by surprise with this. "I also added a portion of my own energy to stabilize the bond between her spirit energy and her physical form. The result," he motioned to her, "a powerful, hollow-like being that won't deteriorate or destroy itself from the inside out." "Amazing," Ichigo said wide-eyed after Sosuke was finished explaining himself. He looked down to the girl and smirked at her. "Well then, I guess we'll have to come up with a name for you." He thought for a second and looked at her, intently thinking of some kind of name that would suit her. Sosuke beat him to it though. "Misuto." Both Ichigo and the girl looked to him and saw the smile on his face. "Since I went through all the trouble of making her, it's only poetic that I get to name her." The girl looked up to him and said her first words all this time. "What does Misuto mean?" The two looked at each other and grinned before looking back to her. "It means mist." Sosuke started with a warm smile. "That's what you were made of for the most part." The girl smiled at hearing what her name meant and started to jump up and down in excitement. Ichigo couldn't help but smile at how happy she looked. It reminded him of his sisters back in his time. After he let her wear herself out a bit, Ichigo stopped her by placing his hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him with a big-toothed smile and panting slightly. "Misuto," Ichigo started with a small smile of his own. "Sosuke over here is gonna teach you basic things, okay? Learn from him and I'll take you someplace where you can really have some fun testing yourself and your limits." "Okay. Okay," Misuto said to him with a nod. Ichigo let her go and looked to Sosuke. "Teach her the basics, Sosuke. When she knows more about herself, contact me with this." Ichigo pulled out a special hell butterfly. Instead of the usual color, this one was completely red. "I'm heading off. Back to Hueco Mundo?" Sosuke asked him. "Yep," Ichigo said as he opened a Garganta. "Need to keep my word after all." And with that, Ichigo leapt through to see just how things were now. Chapter 9, Shinji grows suspicious. Ichigo's answer came when he was met on the sands by a familiar giant worm. This was clearly Bawa Bawa, which meant that Nilil, Pesha, and Dondokaka weren't too far away. Bawa Bawa was doing his best to surprise or scare the Soul Reaper captain, but Ichigo simply stared at the giant worm with a grin on his face. He patted the big worm and, at first, Bawa Bawa tensed up. But the bug-like hollow eased down when he noticed that Ichigo was smiling warmly at him. "Good boy," Ichigo said as he removed his hand from Bawa Bawa and walked along with the big worm in tow. After a few seconds the three aforementioned hollows stepped out from behind a sand dune not far from the captain. They were clearly confused by his actions and the fact that he didn't try anything to harm Bawa Bawa. Ichigo knew they were already there and turned to them. When his eyes locked onto theirs, the three ducked down quickly. "You think he saw us?" Dondokaka asked his brother and sister. "I don't think so." Nilil started before they rose up. They were immediately met by Soul Reaper Captain, who was just standing there with his arms crossed and a grin on his face. "You guys aren't that great at hiding, you know," Ichigo said to them. So where's everyone else at Nilil? Nilil stood up quickly and straightened herself up, much to Ichigo's confusion. They're all back at the ruins of Las Noches, sir. Both Ichigo, Dondokaka, Pesha and even Bawa stared at her in confusion as she said those words like that. Nilil noticed their looks towards her and just said, "What?" Ichigo started to chuckle under his breath, much to the surprise of the four. They so far had never seen him do more than give that death glare to anyone. They didn't know which was more terrifying, his death glare or his smile and chuckle. After Ichigo finished and regained himself, he looked over to Nilil and she straightened up fast. "Nilil, do me a favor." "Yes," she quickly said. "Don't change, okay?" Ichigo said before walking off toward Las Noches. He was followed by Bawa and Dondokaka, but Pesha stopped and looked at Nilil. She seemed a little confused by those words and didn't know how to react to it. "Nell." Pesha started, getting her attention. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said to him in a relaxed tone. "Let's get going." With that, both Nilil and Pesha followed Ichigo to the ruins of Las Noches. It didn't take long for them to reach the broken palace and enter through a crumbled archway. There was a lot of commotion before Ichigo showed up and a few fights going on. All of the Espada had on clothes now, so that was good for Ichigo to know. All of the fighting and noise stopped when Ichigo stepped into view. Ichigo saw how everyone was staring at him in anticipation and wondering if he could really bring back the palace of Hueco Mundo like he promised he would. AKA was among the ones who was waiting on pins and needles as Ichigo made his way over to the center of the large area. As he walked, hollows of nearly all kind moved out of his way. Ichigo finally made it to the center of the broken palace and took a deep breath before sitting cross-legged on the ground. He took another deeper breath and his chest started to glow a light purple color. Everyone was in awe of what they were seeing and had no idea what to think of this whole spectacle. Ichigo took one last breath before the light faded and surrounded him in a circle. When that happened, Ichigo stood up and drew his blade. He stepped out of the circle and popped his neck a few times before saying one word. "Bankai." His blade disappeared from his hand and he moved his right arm into the circle. When he did this, a massive torrent of black, red, and purple energy fired high into the sky. No one could tell what was going on, but they could feel the crushing yet soft spirit pressure dropping on them all. It was unlike anything that anyone had ever felt before, and it only continued as the impossible happened. The once destroyed palace started to form when the beam started to spread out throughout the sky. It formed a large ceiling that covered the entire sky under them and started to spread down toward the ground miles around them all. The destroyed rubble broke down into dark spirit energy and went over to the beam of energy. The spectacle continued for several more seconds until it was complete. Las Noches was back and even more magnificent than before. The floor was tiled with dark red tiles while the walls were a shaded type of white. The room they were in was a massive courtyard-like area with an opening large enough for everyone there to exit and enter at their own will. What surprised every hollow there the most was the fact that the outside had light from a sun out there and instead of sand, it was concrete like a street. The beam was still going but the pressure had died down tremendously to the point that it could barely be felt. Ichigo reached into the beam and grunted for a brief moment before pulling out his now sealed blade. His arm had a burn on it but didn't look all too serious as he sheathed his blade. Ichigo looked around and saw the odd looks on everyone's faces, despite the fact that most of them had masks on. He smirked and looked around until he landed his eyes on a familiar panther Vastolord. "Grimmjow." Ichigo started as he motioned the powerful hollow over to him. Grimmjow was confused on why he was being singled out right now. He saw that all eyes were on him and slowly made his way over to the captain. When he reached Ichigo, he could feel a strange energy resonating from the comm beam and looked over to Ichigo. Said Soul Reaper motioned for Grimmjow to go into it and even grinned while he did so. Grimmjow hesitated at first, but felt a pull that he could feel felt natural to him. With everyone already waiting in anticipation, Grimmjow took a breath and went into the beam. For a few brief seconds, the shadowy figure of a panther changed to that of a man and Grimmjow came out of the other end no longer a Vastolord, but a full-fledged Arrancar like the others. He was a light-skinned man with blue hair, a jaw piece on the right side of his face, was very toned, and had Zanpakuto in its sheath in his hand. Of course he was also naked too. What the fuck? Grimjo said to himself as he looked himself up and down. Impressive, isn't it? Ichigo said, earning Grimjo's attention. Remember this feeling, Grimjo, because that power is yours now. Grimjo actually nodded to the captain out of respect, the first anyone had ever seen him do that before. Ichigo returned it with his own nod and looked around to all the other hollows that weren't Arrancar yet. Each and every single one of you are going to step into this beam to become the very strength this palace deserves. He started with leadership in the tone of his voice. Every single one of you will become Arrancar and live within this restored palace. All I ask from all of you in exchange is your loyalty and help when we face the Soul Society. If you are indeed having second thoughts, then there's the door. You will not be hunted by me or anyone else that decides to stay here. He pointed towards the exit to signal for anyone to leave that didn't want this. There was complete and total silence all throughout the large courtyard as no one even bothered to look at the exit. Ichigo looked around and saw resolve and strength in every pair of eyes around him. He smiled and decided to continue. Good. Then form a line, and do it calmly. There was a bit of irritation in that last phrase so his point could get across. The hundreds of hollows from the weakest Jillian to the strongest Ajicha, they all went through the beam and emerged as Arrancar now. As this was going on, Ichigo was approached by Aka and a few the other Espada. Mainly Halibel, Nilil, Stark, and Sail. That was incredible. Sail started as he was very amazed by the power that the captain had used. I know I won't get any answer from this, but I just have to ask. How did you do this? Ichigo looked at all of them and saw the same look of question mixed in with awe and amazement and chuckled again. It has something to do with an object that I have in my possession. That's all you all need to know. So now that you restored the palace, Stark started in a slightly curious tone. Does that mean we have our own rooms now? Yes, no. Ichigo knew exactly what he was talking about and chuckled again. The rooms in this palace are tailored to your spirit energies. You'll be able to find them if you search for your own familiar energy, Stark. And yes, it has comfortable beds for you to sleep on. Stark smiled at that and excused himself to search for his room. He was followed by an angered Lilinette who wanted to explore with him, not watch him sleep. Oh yeah, Sail. Ichigo started to the pink-haired Espada. I think you'll like room very much. I tailored it to suit that scientific mind of yours, so I made it a laboratory. Sail beamed at hearing that. He bowed many times to Ichigo, much to the captain's mixture of annoyance and amusement. Sail went off to find his room/lab, leaving the area in a hurry. Halibel. Ichigo started again, getting the dark-skinned Arrancar's attention. I know how much you enjoy the water and how it calms you, so your room has something extra to help with that. I hope you enjoy it. Ichigo was referring to a small fountain in her room that had a shark in the center of it spraying water from its eyes into the water. Halibel nodded to him and went in search of her room, but she stopped when she noticed the snake, lion, and deer Ajicha she used to be around. She noticed them as one by one they went through the beam and appeared as young women. They noticed that Halibel was staring at them and they bowed their heads to her. Halibel looked at them, then back to the captain to ask him a question. She didn't even have to ask him as he smirked to her and nodded. Halibel sighed in relief and told the three to follow her to her room. So, do I get anything special in my room or something? Nilil asked Ichigo. He thought for a second before snapping his fingers. Your room has a window that looks out to the ground floor where Bawa will be staying. Really? She yelled out in excitement. She hugged him tightly and released him after a brief moment. The ones that saw this were shocked that the captain didn't do anything to retaliate and instead smiled at her. You're welcome, Nilil. Ichigo said to her. Now go on and find your room, okay? She smiled at him and nodded before leaving to find her room with the new Arrancar forms of Pesha and Dondokaka. Ichigo looked to Aka and saw that he was still staring at the beam of energy. Almost like he was hypnotized by it or something. Impressive, isn't it? Ichigo said as he placed a hand on Aka's shoulder to bring him out of his trance. Aka looked up to him and asked. This power, isn't it the same you used on me when we first met? Yes, it is. Ichigo said to him. Only this time it's more or less used to change hollows to their own liking, not mine. And before you ask, no. Even if you do go through it, you'll still be the same as you are. AKA nodded to him and they both continued to watch the rest of the hollows pass through the beam. A few hours later, Squad 11 barracks. It took a long time, but Ichigo was finally able to leave after the last of the hollows turned into Aaron Carr. He stepped through the Garganta and closed it before unsealing the room. After healing his arm of the burn, Ichigo left the room and went out to find a squad member walking along the barracks. "Captain Ko," he said with a bow. "Tell me, what time is it right now?" Ichigo asked in his usual voice. "Almost 1 o'clock, Captain." "Enough time then," Ichigo said before thanking the man and leaving for the captain's meeting in only 20 minutes. As he walked along, he felt that he was being watched by someone new. This clearly wasn't Swaifo, since she showed the utmost respect for him, and it couldn't have been Yuriuki. She was more of a "let someone else do it" type of person sometimes. Ichigo stopped and felt the energy until he recognized it completely. "Captain Hirako." Ichigo started as he turned to the direction of said captain. "Something I can help you with before the meeting." Shinji stepped out of the shadows and approached Ichigo. He stopped in front of him and had a very serious look on his face. "You can start by telling me just what you and my lieutenant and third seat are up to. Then give me one good reason I shouldn't report any of your recent actions to the Central 46. Ichigo hadn't changed his expression not once and instead folded his arms. "Like I said with Yuriuki before concerning Swaifon, I see potential in those two. And unlike you, Captain Hirako, I actually push them to reach that potential instead of having them figure it out on their own." Shinji narrowed his eyes on the captain and continued to listen. "Now I honestly don't know what you really mean by my recent actions, but I assure you, I haven't done anything to warrant any sort of actions towards me." Shinji had enough of this and grabbed the captain by his haori. The passing Soul Reapers were shocked by what was occurring and watched intently. "You're hiding something, Ko," he said in a low tone so only the both of them could hear. "You appear out of the blue with this already established power at the academy. Blow through the academy and everyone in your squad within less than a century. You become a captain with a Zanpakuto unlike anything anyone had ever seen in the history of the Soul Society. You train lieutenants and other seated officers for a bogus reason, and you keep placing a barrier not even a captain could get through. You're hiding something and I don't like it, Ko." Ichigo noticed the crowd started to get a little bit larger and decided to break the tension between him and Shinji. "You are right about one thing, Shinji. I am hiding something, but you'll never know until I believe you're ready to see it like your lieutenant has." That caught Shinji's attention completely. Ichigo grabbed at his arm and lowered it off of himself calmly. "So are we done here, Captain? We have a meeting to get to." Ichigo let go of Shinji's arm and walked off to the direction of the captain's meeting. As he walked, the ones in his way moved aside and Shinji watched with an angered look as Ichigo walked away. Chapter 10, Another New Student. It had been a few years since Ichigo restored Las Noches to its new glory and a lot has happened since then. Misuto had learned many things from Sosuke and was now on par with him in terms of strategy and battle tactics. She had trained with him in terms of Ryutsu manipulation in a Hollow's version of Shunpo called Sonido. She would train with Ichigo in secrecy from everyone except Sosuke to control her enormous energy and even master her Zanpakuto, Arroganti. Misuto had also grown from a little girl to a teenage-like girl. She was now far more proficient now than she was when she was created all those years ago and had even taken to calling Sosuke her father. Sosuke actually didn't mind. Swaifon had also gotten stronger and far more devoted to training her mind and body to show Ichigo that she does indeed have the potential to be great. After several attempts and a few antagonizing remarks, she had finally had the chance to face her own captain, Yuriuki, and managed to defeat her. It was something that didn't go unnoticed from the rest of Squad 2 as rumors of Swaifon surpassing Captain Shihoan spread throughout the Seirei. Ichigo was proud to hear that his student had won in her fight and proven her strength to everyone, especially Yuriuki. Jin had become a little less creepy nowadays. Instead of always creeping up on people or sneaking up on them, he had taken to simply meeting them head-on. It was a useful new trait he picked up from watching the way Ichigo fought when they went hollow hunting. It was something else for Jin to watch how his teacher performed in battle even if he was holding back considerably. He decided then and there that he would fight somewhat similarly to his teacher, and one day try and surpass him. Sosuke had grown stronger and was even at captain class power now, same as the others. Even with his hectic schedule and constant avoidance of his captain, he still found the time to train. He even let Misuto out of the lab every once in a while to watch him train. True, he had to place an energy dampener on her so no one could sense her, but it proved very useful to get his new adoptive daughter out into the fresh air a few times a month. He also seemed happier now that he had her with him on a more than constant basis. In Hueco Mundo there was a lot of order now that Las Noches was rebuilt. There was daily training regimens that were tailored to every single Arrancar there and even monochromes of respect given to everyone. Ichigo had taken the time to personally train each and every single Arrancar there despite how long it took. Now they all seemed heavily accustomed to fighting captain-class Soul Reapers. Ichigo decided to take it a step further when he brought Sosuke and Misuto with him the first time around. Not many of the Arrancar could tell, but some felt that her energy was like Baragon's on a slight level. She was immediately placed as the new 5th Espada, placing Ulquiorra at 6, Neutra at 7, and both Zamari, Sail, and Araniro at the same positions. It was demonstrated by her of her incredible power that made the 5 not question. AKA was amazed by how strong Misuto was, all things considered. He had decided to show her around the first time she showed up and the two became friends easily. Now that they both looked like teenagers, most of the Arrancars didn't think that it was just some kid's thing going on. Ichigo hadn't changed all too much. He had grown some facial hair that was mainly just stubble, but all in all he still looked the same. Ichigo had kept his eyes on recent events and people that he could entice to him or deal with if need be. It didn't take him long when he spotted a young adult Soul Reaper walking alongside the current captain of Squad 6, Jinrei Kukaki. The young man looked like a younger and less hardened Byakuya. Byakuya was in standard Soul Reaper attire and actually just had his hair tied up in a ponytail with a red ribbon. While he was lounging on one of his off days in a bar with Ishine and Kiraku, he noticed the young Byakuya and could see that he was nowhere close to the Byakuya who had that massive stick up his ass. In fact, he was actually smiling as he walked with his grandfather. Ichigo decided to take this opportunity to seek out a new student he could use to help with his plans in the far future. "Hey, Jinrei!" Ichigo yelled out as he got the old man's attention. Jinrei turned to see 3 of his fellow captains sitting together and enjoying a drink and smirked. "Come have a drink with us." Jinrei simply shook his head to stifle a chuckle and walked into the establishment, Byakuya right behind him. It had become a very common occurrence for the old man to now partake in a few drinks with his fellow captains, especially since he was almost at the end of his captaincy position due to his health and age. He sat down next to Ishine while Byakuya stood there, actually nervous to be in the presence of 2 of the most respected captains and the most feared one. Ichigo looked over to the young man and saw his hesitance. He smirked under his cup before gulping down the sake to keep pace with Kiraku. "So Jinrei, is this your grandson I've heard so much about?" Ichigo asked the man. "Yes, he is Ichigo," Jinrei said with a smirk. "This is Byakuya Kukaki, the next heir to the Kukaki name and my eventual successor when his training is complete." That last part made the 3 at the table perk up while Byakuya looked away in embarrassment. "You mean you're gonna let someone so young take over for you as both head of the Kukaki clan and captain of Squad 6? Ishine asked to clarify what he just heard. "Yes, he is," Jinrei said with another smirk. "I take it you see his potential as well, don't you Ichigo?" All eyes were now on Ichigo as he looked up and down the standing Kukaki. By this point in time it was already known that Ichigo did in fact teach young and up-and-coming Soul Reapers with potential. He already had 3 with him that were now considered being captains in the near future. Since he had been paying so much attention to Byakuya, Jinrei could tell what most likely could happen next and acted preemptively. "If you see such potential in my grandson and wish to unlock said potential, then he is yours to train Ichigo." This surprised everyone at the table, especially both Byakuya and Ichigo. Byakuya for how his grandfather had practically given him to the captain of Squad 11 to train, and Ichigo for how simple it was to get another student without having to convince them. Jinrei." Kiraku started in a voice that had a mixture of confusion and subtle laughter to it. "Are you sure about this? I mean, from what I've heard, Ichigo's training isn't to be taken lightly." Ichigo gave a subtle glare to the calm captain who was now chuckling under his hat. "I'm sure Byakuya can handle it," Jinrei said in a surefire tone. Ichigo looked back to the old man, then noticed that Byakuya looked a little worried. Ichigo had never interacted with Byakuya in this time before, so this was new to him. The most contact he had was years ago when he saw him as a kid trying and failing to chase Yoriyuki for a hair ribbon. In his own time, Byakuya never showed any other emotion aside from the rare angered scowl and the very rare smirk that Renji told him about one time. To see him before he was so stoic had Ichigo realized that something must have caused that to happen. With one last look over, Ichigo stood up. This got everyone's attention as he went over to Jinrei's grandson. Ichigo towered over him like most people from his future and could see the nervousness in Byakuya's eyes. Ichigo could tell that if Byakuya were to continue as is or was influenced by someone outside of his clan, then maybe he wouldn't turn out as the stoic a-hole he was in the future. It was worth a shot, so Ichigo spoke up. I can tell that he does have much potential. Ichigo started, surprising Byakuya. He will make a great captain, if he were truly tested, that is. He looked over to Jinrei and smirked. I'll train him with my other students to bring about that potential. The words were like music to Jinrei's ears. He knew that if Byakuya was really pushed, then he could really reach his true potential and become something great in the Soul Society. Ichigo looked back to Byakuya and saw a look of both confusion and a hint of anticipation for the training. He could tell that this was going to be fun in a weird and awkward time travel kind of way. Check the description for the links to the author.